Cool. Thank you so much, Ron, and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Generative AI session on Google Cloud. My name is Sagar Kevalramani, and I'm an AI specialist customer engineer at Google Cloud. And thank you, Angelbeat, and especially Ron, for this opportunity to allow us to present Google's cloud capabilities in the generative AI space. Now, I think many of us have been here for more than 1.5 hours or 90 minutes. So I want to ensure that I limit the slide content and focus more on the demos so that you can have a very good understanding of the technology and the space and the evolution of AI, especially with generative AI. So with that being said, and last but not least, by the way, my LinkedIn is on the slide right now. If you guys want to reach out to me offline, feel free to get reach out to my LinkedIn, and you can always even email me at saggy@google.com, saggy@google.com. So with that, let's dive into some of the content on generative AI with Google Cloud. So I thought we can actually start with a brief history of evolution of AI and how did we get here. Now, large language models have really kicked off a innovation of technology around us and a whole new world for developers and AI practitioners. I think every one of us is very excited and pumped with this new innovation in the technology space. So let's kind of go back a few years and see where we were and now where we are. Now, large language models have been in making for years. Like I think everyone, Bala, Akshay, David, everyone talked about it has been a while that large language models were being worked upon. And also to know as Google is at the very front of AI in this space. Let me share a few moments where this whole evolution started with the release of Transformers back in 2017. In fact, Transformer is the path-breaking neural architecture which started all this evolution of large language models and generative AI innovation. You can think of a transformer as a grandparent of all the models you see in this space. In fact, when you see a capital T in an acronym of any algorithm in the AI space, it's safe to assume that T stands for transformers, which was innovated and contributed by Google in the open source community. And since then, Google has evolved from introducing transformers to now BERT models, T5 model, Palm, and also many of you are now interacting directly with Bard, which is a public-facing service on the generative AI thing. Now, when you think about this generative AI ecosystem, I want to focus on the enterprise capabilities of generative AI or how enterprise can really leverage generative AI in their ecosystem. So this is how the Google is positioning the generative AI capabilities for enterprises. We have actually segregated our offerings based on different personas in an enterprise or any customer base. So if you look at the bottom, that's our cloud infrastructure, or that's the Google Cloud or availability for every customers and consumers in that space. Then you actually see something called as Vertex AI. Now, Vertex AI is Google's cloud end-to-end machine learning platform that helps data science and enterprises to fast-track their machine learning model development and deployment, going from feature engineering, model tuning, training, as well as low latency inferences, along with enterprise class governance and monitoring. We are excited to introduce generative AI capabilities into this Vertex AI platform or an existing platform for machine learning. Now, in terms of the capabilities, what we have done is we have introduced something called as Model Garden, which is very exciting, by the way. It's a single place to store and use any of the large language models. We already have our Google state-of-art models like Palm available as part of the Model Garden, but we have also opened Model Garden to some of the open source models like Stable Diffusion, so on and so forth. And I'll show you a few of those as we get into it. We also have introduced something called generative AI APIs. If there are any developers who wants to call these models and integrate within their applications, they can just directly interact with APIs or even tune these APIs either by prompt tuning or even fine tuning so that they can have their customized version of the models. I did hear that there were a lot of concerns about how to avoid exposing your first party data outside to these models because these are large language models and they can take your data as well. How to avoid that, and we already have an architecture in place which can ensure that all your queries and prompts which are being triggered to these models, they stay in your tenant or in your Google Cloud project, and they are not exposed to the large model. And we call it as something called as adapter model, and we can talk more about it as we go along. And last but not least, we also have introduced something called Generative AI Studio, which allows you to start playing with this technology in a no-code fashion. And I'll show you all of those as we get into the demo. The second set of capabilities which I want to talk about is the middle layer, which is our low code, no code options called as App Builder. Now, this is very exciting. Like we talked about these large models who are capable of answering any questions across the internet. But what about a search engine or a conversational experience on your first party data? What this app builder is enabling is to exactly fulfill that particular scenario. Can you build a search engine on top of a first party data with few clicks or in a no code fashion? Similarly, can you have an extractive Q&A summarization on top of your first party data without exposing it to the large models? These are all the capabilities which app builder is trying to solve, and I'll show you an example of that too. And last but not least is the top layer, which is our out of the box available solutions, which are now being augmented by the generative AI capability. So all these solutions have existed for a while. Many of them were already using transformer based models, but we are augmenting them and introducing new capabilities as the generative AI is being infused into different products and technologies. So that's kind of a high level portfolio of some of the Google Cloud offerings, and I'll show you them in action too as we get into the demo. I have last two slides and then we'll jump into the demo, so stay tuned. Now, on a very high level, what Google has done is Google has right now introduced 6 different APIs. If you want to go into a direction of integrating some of these capabilities into your existing application or even fine tuning or upgrading some of your existing models. The first API is about the text API, which is primarily the summarization, conversation, those kind of experience on top of any kind of text verb. So that's the text API. Then we also have something called as code API. Now this is very interesting because now this code API can also understand all the code assets which your team or your developers have created over the course of years. It can understand the context from it and then start integrating or giving suggestions when new code is being written. So very powerful API, which is also available in our suite of products. Then we also have image and video API. What that really means is with text, can we generate a multimodal output? So by just giving a text prompt, we can actually generate an image or even a video, which is very exciting. Recently, Sundar Pichai actually demonstrated that in one of his interviews, where they were able to generate a 30-second video of forest by just writing a simple text prompt. So very powerful capability in the multimodal space. Then we also have something called as chat or dialogue conversation API. And this is something like, can you put a conversation experience on top of your first party data? And I have an example for that, so she'll show you that as well. And last but not least, a couple of other offerings is the generation of audio and music, and my personal favorite, embeddings. Now, when this you look at this space, I think we talked about embeddings in the Redis session. We also talked about embeddings in our AWS session. It's all about, can you use your data, translate it in some kind of shape or format so that machine can find the right data from your context or from a large corpus of data. That's where embeddings comes into picture. So embeddings actually translates your data or your first party data into something called as vectors. And then once they are translated into vector, you can do something called as vector similar search, what we learned in the Redis session too, to actually identify the closest match and find the right information or retrieve the right information. By the way, this is kind of the core principle of even Google search engine. So Google search also works on a very similar concept of translating data or context into embeddings and then doing a similar search on top of it. So those are various foundation models which are available in the Vertex AI environment as an API or even in the UI, and I'll show you a few of them as we get into that. And before I conclude my slides and get into the console, I just want to emphasize on few different things which are very critical from enterprises or which are very critical from customer standpoint. I think Harris had a lot of questions about data security or data governance. And I think in this era of generative AI, data governance and IP control becomes extremely crucial, extremely important. You don't want your data or your first party data to be leaked to these large models and being made available in like public or so. I think there have been a lot of articles recently in public or internet there where the data has been leaked. So how to avoid that, how to control your IP, I think that's one of the core questions among enterprises and customers. And that's where we have put together, or Google Cloud have put together an architecture where you can still use this technology and avoiding your data getting out to these large models or avoiding your data going out of your firewall or internet. The second thing is the choice and the value, and this is actually very important, and something it is also important to understand is that bigger is not always better. Like having a large model will solve all your problems may not be the case. What Google is believing is that one model will not be able to rule all the use cases which we have in our industry today. So what we have adopted, or the principles we have adopted, is something called as distillation and reinforcement learning, to create something called smaller models based on your first party data set. So we enable our customers to create smaller models on their first party data set, sitting in their tenants or in their GCP project, so that you don't have to worry about creating these large, humongous models, and also the cost and resources to maintain them. Because these models can be very expensive to not only train them, but also maintain them. But having them in a smaller scale models, it makes it easier for enterprises to have similar or even better capabilities, and have a cost control and governance control on them. And we have some great architecture around that. And one last point I would also would emphasize, and which we'll see in the demo too, is the factuality. Sorry about that. I think I'm hungry now. But factuality is very important. I think we understand the power and creativity of these large models. Sometimes we also use a term called hallucination, right? So how can we ensure these models are focused on your data instead of going out to an external data, or even coming up with something very creative which may or may not be true? How you can ground to factuality, and that's very important, especially for enterprises and customers. And that's where we are ensuring that it's important to understand, or have a control, or have a guardrail around your models, how to ensure your model is pointing to the right data set. And if it is taking the data from public, it should be able to cite it or give that information when the responses are being fed. So those are some areas where Google has been investing a lot, because Transformers was not new to Google. They have innovated and contributed that to open source. But the governance and the security and privacy around that, those are the areas which Google has been focused upon in the last couple of years, and have been now being released through to our customers through Google Cloud Platform. So with that, it's demo time. I kept very few slides so that we can focus on demos and see some content in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into our Google Cloud Platform, and we can actually start looking into some of the capabilities in action. So what you see on my screen right now is our Vertex AI platform. And as I indicated, Vertex AI is Google's cloud end-to-end machine learning platform, meant for enterprises to fast scale their machine learning development processes, using a lot of options like AutoML, APIs, as well as custom code. Now, within Vertex AI, we have infused or introduced a lot of generative AI capabilities. One of them is called as Generative AI Studio. Now, the Generative AI Studio focuses right now on language and vision, or those are the two common segregations what you see here. The idea is we are kind of keeping it multimodal space, where you have text-related models separate, and then vision or video-related models separate. So we can look into our language-related models. And when you think about language, we have different type of things which you can do with them. What you see on the left is do some kind of prompts on the models. You can also have a chat experience, which is also text. And last but not least, we can allow you to build or bring your own data and create a fine tuning or a prompt tuned model for an enterprise, and all that data stays in your GCP project. So let's take a quick example here. So instead of going through a random example, what I would try to do is primarily actually take an example where I'm a customer, and I'm using Google Cloud technology, and I want to create a multimedia campaign. Now, what should I create the multimedia campaign about? Maybe let's create a multimedia campaign for generative AI for Google Cloud itself. Let's take that as an example and go end to end on how I can use this technology to solve that problem. So primarily, first thing I want to do is to come up with some of the top topics I will use for my multimedia campaign. So when Google introduced this technology in public, Google actually wrote a blog about it and what generative AI can do for different enterprises, and also the different offerings and capabilities what Google Cloud is working upon. So I actually have this blog as maybe a starting point. Maybe I can use this blog to understand what should be the important or top topics for my multimedia campaign, and start from there. So maybe I can copy this content from this blog and try to understand which are the 3 or 4 top key takeaways from this model, which I can use it for my multimedia campaign. So let's do a copy paste from here, from this blog itself, and give it to our model to see what it can generate for us. So here is what I am doing. So I'll go into my uh, uh, go back to my chat experience, and I'll tell him that summarize the top four value propositions into bullet list from this blog. So I'm just asking him to do this. I can also, by the way, set a context, and this is very powerful, which we are not going to use today, but I'm more than happy to do an offline review with you guys. So I'm just going to summarize the top four value propositions based on the blog, which was already published. Maybe those will be the content which we can use for our multimedia campaign for Google Cloud focused on generative AI. Okay, so looks like we have an output, and the model came up with some of the four top value propositions. And also, when it's generating those propositions, it has given some details as well, so that you don't have to read that 3 or 4 page long blog, and you can just focus on those four things. Now, I have four things which I have with me, which I can use for multimedia campaign. What I can do is maybe ask the machine or the technology itself to use these four things and generate a campaign for me. So maybe I can go to the prompt mode and maybe start creating here. So I'll just take those four things and ask the machine that I want to create a multimedia campaign. So I want to create a multimedia campaign for Google Cloud Generative AI capabilities that highlights the differentiators, what we got from that blog. And the 4 or 5 differentiators which I saw in the blog are this ones, like accessibility, privacy, scalability, security, experimentation, and so on and so forth. And then I will also ask the machine for my campaign, please give me some a headline, a post, Instagram caption, and hashtag. So I'll have a lot of content here which I can use for publishing my blog into different forums or different channels, maybe Instagram as well. And then also, by the way, what you see on the right is the model type. Now, this is very interesting, by the way. Now I'm testing with something called a text bison model, which is built on top of our Palm model, which was released a couple of years back. And we also give a lot of controls when you're generating your model output or when you're generating a text output. So temperature, if you're not familiar with temperature actually allows you to control the creativity of your models. So you can actually make your model realize that should it focused on something which is based on the reality or factuality, or it can be as creative as it want, and you can increase the temperature. You can also increase the token limit. The token limit primarily governs the output of this text. So I'm actually giving him a token limit of 1024 so that we can get maximum output of it. And I'll just go ahead and submit it. So what the machine is doing is taking some of the differentiators we identified from that blog and generating another blog for us, and also some Instagram captions, which we can use for a multimedia campaign. So let's see what we get out of this. Okay, so we have a blog headline. The future of AI is here. I think everyone believes in that headline, what we got generated. And then we have a blog post. You can also see there is emphasis on the differentiators which we gave to the model. So those have been taken into account. And then I have some Instagram caption and also the Instagram hashtags, which sounds very relevant to the space we are dealing with, like future of technology, generative AI, artificial intelligence. All of that makes perfect sense to me, big data. So this is pretty cool what it was able to do, like by summarizing something what exists and now coming up with something more on top of it. I do also want to show you something called as view code. Now, what this environment gives capability is something called a symmetric experience to our users or customers. So not only you can use UI to come up with something, but you can take these capabilities and use this code which is generated based on the testing you are doing. You can just copy this code into your Python world, and now you are whatever you experience in UI, you can also experience in a API world or in a command world. So you don't have to worry about writing that whole code again. So a very powerful way of having a symmetric experience, not only in the UI, but also getting a Python code generated out of it. So I think we have seen a lot of text generation, summarization. I think even Bala showed at the beginning. Let's switch gears and maybe do something more interesting. Now, we also support multimodal or capability to generate different formats of data. And we just saw text. Let's look into something called as images. So we have something called as vision capabilities, which allows you to not only generate image, but also edit them. And that's pretty cool. And I'll show you both of them. So let's start with generating them. So we'll go back to our multimedia campaign. Now, whenever you publish a blog or whenever you do a marketing campaign, you always have some kind of interesting image for your a blog or for your campaign. So maybe let's ask machine to even generate an image for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a prompt, and your prompt could be as interesting as you want. So what I'm doing is I'm asking the machine to create a DSLR image that focus on generative AI. It should show something, a future where machines and humans are working together. And I'm also asking him to generate some key benefits of it. So looks like it has generated a few images for us. I can also go ahead and submit it if I don't like it, and it will generate some new more images for us so that you can continue doing that process. There's also something where you can even define specific things in your prompts where it can actually start modifying or focusing on those things. So it can be very powerful. To give you an example of that specific capability, let's take a simple example so that we can actually see the changes as the image is being evolved or as we are providing a prompt. So I'll go back and reset the screen. So we already have a media or image for a media campaign, but I'll take a different example here. So we'll start with flowers, which is very simple to understand and see the differences. So I'll start with a flower, saying that generate a flower pot with some colorful flowers on a tabletop. And I'm just giving a very simple prompt just to see what it comes up with, and we'll start modifying that experience and see how where this technology can be taken. Okay, so looks like we have some flower pots being generated. Maybe they're being pulled up from some special flower bed or something as they are coming up. Okay, so we have some flower pots. They look beautiful. Let's actually enhance this image. Maybe put a illumination or spotlight on this flower. So I'm just adding another line to this. So what it's doing is it's taking some of the existing images and trying to add a spotlight on top of it. So you're kind of playing with the image so that it can be very appealing for marketing purposes. So now we are adding a spotlight to it. Okay, so we got spotlights on some of the flower pots, and now the spotlight looks very attractive in the night. So maybe put this flower pot close to a window. So let's put it close to a window and maybe have a New York skyline in the night along with a plane in the sky. So we're just putting all the imagination, what we can think about, and asking him to generate an image. So now we should have a flower pot with illumination as well as a window with a plane in the sky and a New York skyline or something similar to New York skyline. So look at the images. What we got. We were sitting on with a flower pot on a table, and now we are actually at a window with a aeroplane in the sky as well as some New York skyline, which looks very beautiful. So power of machine learning AI and generative AI, what you just saw with images. So you can do a lot more things to especially generate different type of marketing images and take it forward for different type of campaigns you may have. So that's on the vision and text. I do also want to introduce you to something called as Model Garden, which is another powerful capability what Google has introduced. Now, this is a single stop for all the different large language models you can think about. And we have the Google state of art models like Palm, and then we also have open source models listed over here. One of the models I think Akshay was talking about is text to image generation model called Stable Diffusion, very popular in the industry. So I can even actually go to open source models and start looking for the different open source models I have. So I have filtered on open source models. So we have about 16 or so or 17 or so. And then we are continuing to add more models, and you'll start seeing more and more models as we continue to evolve. What we've also introduced in Model Garden is a very cool capability of one-click deploy. I can actually just click deploy button, and it allows me to deploy stable diffusion model or a working stable diffusion model on Vertex AI. That's pretty cool. Once the model is deployed, now you can start doing predictions, or even you can uptrain the stable diffusion model on your environment so that it understands your images. So this one-click deployment can be a big differentiator when you're playing with these large language models and you have requirements of tuning and fine tuning. And by the way, all these models are sitting in your GCP project. So they are still under firewall, which you can govern, and it's not being exposed to the external ecosystem. So these are some of the capabilities which are available in the UI out of the box. Now, the last capability I want to show you before we conclude our session is how I can train some of these technologies on top of my first party data. Now, we have multiple capabilities here. One is to use those APIs and train the model on top of your first party data. We also have something called as App Builder, which gives you a no-code a wizard or a UI to create those capabilities. So what I'm going to show you is a Gradio UI. I think many of you would have uh, heard about Gradio. Gradio is an open source project to create some kind of UI on top of your data science work. So what I have done is I have given a corpus of cloud.google.com to this particular a chatbot or interactive UI and index that information. I use two specific APIs which we have. One is embeddings API and one is text API. The embeddings API is going to look at all the cloud.google.com as a website, and it will take all the data from it and make it available as a corpus and as a vector environment. And we also have a vector database, so it's storing all that embeddings in the vector database in a fully managed database. And once that vector data is stored or indexed, we are actually using the text API to summarize the data out of it. To show you a few examples of it, like for example, I can ask him, um, can you tell me different ways to secure Google Cloud environment? So I'm just asking him to give me a step-by-step guide to secure a Google Cloud environment or a project, because I think everyone is focused on security here. So what it's doing now, it's looking at that vector database, which is a fully managed interface, and trying to identify what would be the best answer. And then it will call the text API to even summarize the data for me so that I can get all the steps. Now I'm also printing two different outputs so that I can get a variety of responses from the model. So here are some steps which the model came up with, and looks like it even summarized the information very well. Now, I think one thing which I also mentioned to at the beginning, talking about differentiators, is the grounded in factuality. We really want to understand where this data is coming from. We just don't want to bring it from any random sources. So as you can see here, what it does is it actually identified all this information in something called as Google Cloud Security Foundation Guide, which is actually a public guide available on Google or cloud.google.com. So it was able to find that, and it also telling that, hey, I pulled that information from page 2, 25, and 13 and summarize that information for you. So you can get that kind of information or factuality information about where this is originating from. Similarly, another example we can try is maybe ask him something about BigQuery. Now, BigQuery is Google Cloud fully managed data warehouse, a very popular data warehouse in the industry today, which can scale to petabytes or even exabyte scales. So I'm just asking him, can I use BigQuery as a marketing warehouse? The reason I put marketing is because it actually goes to the marketing page on the website. So look at this. It actually came up with a summary. That's pretty cool. Like, it summarized that information. It also summarized some benefits of BigQuery, which is pretty cool. And here is another format of the same question. So two different type of responses. And then you can see here, this is coming from all these citations or different sources from Google Cloud Product website. So it found that information on Google Cloud Product website and just pulled that information from there, collected it, summarized it, and now you see it on the screen. So a lot of ways to use this technology, and I think the space is going to continue grow. Um, so those were a few demos which I had. I'm more than happy to have a offline conversation as well to start deep diving with you guys. If you guys want to get in touch with Google Cloud team, there are a few ways you can do that. First and foremost, if you already have a Google Cloud point of contact, please reach out to them and they can help you get access to all these cool technologies. If you do not have a direct contact, you can actually go to the Trusted Tester program, which you see, which is a second bit.ly link on my screen. That gives you or asks you about your information or your GCP project and whitelist or allow list these capabilities in your project. If you don't want to go on that process, you can also reach out to me and I can connect you to some Google Cloud team who can help you get allow listed for these capabilities. And last but not least, I also want to tell you about the upcoming Garage series. So I also own something called as Google Cloud Garage series, which is a hands-on format to experience some of the Google Cloud technologies. And we have one coming up on May 24th, which is focused on generative AI. And as part of that session, you will actually get a hands-on experience on some of the things which I just showed you, and even getting into more deep dive where you can actually fine-tune a custom model based on a certain data set. So you will get exposure to the whole end-to-end life cycle of working along with Gen AI capabilities or generative AI capabilities on Google Cloud. So if you're interested, please go to that link and register on that portal, and we look forward to have you for that session. So with that, I'll conclude my sessions, and we'll take a couple of questions before we call it for the day.